If I told you a walking Aquaman meme that has relations with aquatic animals would end up being one of the most interesting characters on a hit TV show, would you believe it? Probably not. With that being said, under this bleak and nihilistic lens, we're essentially forced to watch superheroes under the context if they were in our world today, essentially being pimped out by corporations. This makes the Deep end up being one of the worst kind of people, in my opinion. Maybe even worse than Homelander, but I might be getting ahead of myself.
Real eyes, realize, realize.
Even though he isn't the main character, I would argue the Deep is one of the most carefully written characters on the show. The Deep as a person is shallow, dumb, and a stereotypical dude bro that usually gets played off for comic relief. But as a character, he low-key has a lot of nuance. Looking back at his first interaction in season 1, we're supposed to view him as pathetic. He tricked Starlight into smoking his pole, as he would put it. But even after doing something that horrible, the show sneakily gets me to care about him and his journey. They give him so many underdog qualities, it's hard not to. Like, he's a piece of shit, but you still root for him to get back into the 7 and get back on his feet. And whether or not you're a fan of the boys, you gotta give credit where credit is due, because that's a really hard task after such an awful character introduction.
What?
Hell, even the disturbing storyline with him having a secret freaky relationship with an octopus is kinda sad. Silly as hell, but sad. He wants to be with her, but he can't because, bestiality is illegal for one, and two, the public perception of him is that he's a sexual deviant, and that definitely won't help him out. The writers knew what they were doing with him, even going as far as making him the star of the Vault International YouTube channel, where we see suits as if they're in our world today, and I gotta say it's hilarious. But just because he's funny and has some sympathetic qualities, don't let the writers fool you. The Deep is still a villain, and as the show went on, that became more and more apparent.
I'm going to do everything in my power to renew my light. Not just for you, but for all the female people that I've offended.
Have you ever done something that was good or kind, but maybe your intentions weren't the purest? Do you remember that feeling in your chest you got? That's the feeling I get when watching the Deep's progression over the 4 seasons of The Boys. From a writing perspective, he's a great example of how to progress and regress a character in a way that actually makes sense. But speaking of progression, let's briefly go over his so-called redemption arc, shall we? So our intro was him pulling out his meat and manipulating Starlight into showing him what that mouth do as soon as she mentioned she had a crush on him as a kid, showing us he gets off on exerting power over people. Women in particular, which is a theme we'll definitely dive deeper into a little bit later. He only apologizes when Starlight goes public with the information about what happened to her, which we see he's not actually sorry because he does it to someone else next season. He mopes and wallows around, not because he's disgraced at what he did, but because he doesn't have the 7 anymore. He finally starts to do a little bit of reflecting and healing, but not really because he cared about bettering himself as a person. He only went on that journey because the cult promised that they can get him back in the good graces of Vought and the public eye. And all of this leads him into doing the most performative press tour known to man. He's in a relationship with this woman who, without her, his image would still be in the gutter for sure. At times, it kinda seems like he has genuine feelings for her, or at least he wants to. But as soon as he gets back with the gang, he downplayed her role tremendously and started feeling himself a little bit too much and pretty much just kicked her to the curb. And this is where his redemption arc slowly starts to fall apart and he starts to regress.
You shut the fuck up! A woman who thinks you're pathetic! Get it! Come back!
So maybe you're looking at him at this point like that doesn't mean he's a villain necessarily, just because he did some bad things, right? Well, I think that's kind of the point. I had a conversation with my lady the other day about someone she knows who ex-husband used to abuse her. Now, she's never met this ex-husband before. She's never seen him. She didn't know what he looked like. She had a bus tour with her work the other day, and she was talking about how she met this bus driver who was just so kind, one of the nicest and most welcoming people she's ever met. Well, a few days later, she comes in extremely upset because she finds out this was the ex-husband that was abusing her friend. She was mad. She was asking, like, how didn't she see it? She feels like she would be able to detect something like that in a person. But that's not how it goes in real life. In real life, it's not always so apparent who's a villain like Homelander or the Joker. It's just not that simple. In a show where the social commentary is usually pretty straightforward and obvious, the writers tend to use the Deep to comment with a little more subtlety. Like the fact that he's a lot of people's favorite character on the show, even though we repeatedly witness him doing horrific things. They seem mild when compared to some of his counterparts, but they're still pretty crazy things. I don't think it's a coincidence that the most likable character on the show has conflicts that resemble real life so closely. Okay, maybe knocking boots with an octopus isn't real life for a lot of people, at least I hope not. But what about holding someone down, like holding your partner down in one of their lowest points, only for that person to get better and then discard the partner when they're back on their feet? I personally think the term bad is such an easy black and white term to slap on most of the characters on this show, especially the Deep. Of all the things the boys attempts to say, I think this is kind of its main point. Good and bad are a lot more gray than we choose to believe. A better word to describe the Deep, in my opinion, would be dangerous. No matter what's going on with him, his only motivation throughout this entire series has always been one thing, and that's chasing the feeling that he actually matters. And the way he feels that is when he can get a taste of or be close to power. So let's circle back to the theme of him using women. In almost every interaction with him and a woman, whether it's progressing or regressing, it pretty much reinforces his powerlessness. With his star-like arc, he was exerting power over her, making her do sexual acts. Then he joined the cult, which was probably a horrible decision, but he wanted to get back to that position of power so bad that he didn't really care what it took. He got to write books and travel the world and speak in front of people who actually listened to him for once, and I'm sure it was some icing on the cake that somebody seemed to care enough about him to want to help him get back on his feet. His relationship with his cover girlfriend is probably the most telling incident. Even though this relationship is arranged, it's probably one of the most healthy relationships he's ever been in, and that very clearly makes him uncomfortable. There were multiple times throughout the series where she was feeding him lines and giving him things to say in the meetings with Homelander. Homelander's actually taking these things in and he's not dismissing them for once. She's clearly a saving grace for him at this point, but he doesn't feel fulfilled. Partially because he's secretly in love with Ambrosius, but it's also because she's interrupting that feeling. He doesn't feel like he matters, knowing that all of his ideas that are getting credit aren't actually his.
I swear to God, stupid people who think they're smart make me want to eat my own shit.
Then there's his dynamic with Ashley. The Deep takes a lot of crap from her throughout the show. She's a lot like him in many ways. She can't show her anger towards the person she really wants to, so she takes it out on anyone who's beneath her, including the Deep. It's one thing if his overlord Homelander belittles him, but Ashley's essentially a nobody, so this makes him feel extremely small. And finally, there's Sage. In his situation with Sage, he's clearly attracted to her because she's one of the only people who Homelander listens to, which makes her super powerful in his eyes. Before her exit, Sage reminds him that he's a soup and he's superior to humans. He doesn't have to take crap from Ashley or anyone else for that matter. And what's the first thing he does with this newfound confidence?
I am the Lord of the Seven Seas. You talk to me like that again, and I will drown you in your fucking toilet, you stupid bitch.
And honestly, that moment was kind of the premise for this entire video, because for about 10 seconds, I was super happy for him. He finally stood up for himself. He stopped groveling around like he was worthless. But that happiness faded really quickly because we all know what happens when a character like this finally gets a little inkling of power.
Tell me I'm the smartest superhero in the Seven. You are, by far, the smartest superhero in the Seven. You're brilliant.
At this point in the show, the idiot with redeeming qualities that we met in the beginning of the series is no more. Now let's dive into this weird dynamic between the Deep and Homelander. If you're watching from a surface level, you may see no reason why the Deep would even want to go back to the Seven. No one in the group shows him any sort of respect, especially Homelander. He humiliates him constantly. The Deep will change his morals, beliefs, and even his sexuality as long as it pleases him.
Sex is just a spectrum, right, bro?
He'll do whatever it takes to be close enough to get a good firm grip on Homelander's sack. But why? Is it because he has some undying loyalty to Homelander? No, we know that's not true because on his journey back to the Seven, the Deep was the one who actually gave Queen Maeve the footage of Flight 37. If he was so loyal to Homelander, why would he give her that footage? He knows that could destroy Homelander's image if it were to ever get out, but he gave it to her anyway because she could help with his ultimate goal. He didn't even consider the fact that Homelander could kill him if he finds out this info. And that right there goes back to show you his motivation isn't based in loyalty. His motivation isn't based in fear. He always goes back to that constant chase of self-worth and power. And Homelander is the ultimate power fantasy. Earlier in the video, I hinted that the Deep might be worse than Homelander. And maybe that's a stretch, but he does strike a nerve in a different way. See, to me, his power obsession and his constant need to be next to Homelander is sad and revolting in a lot of ways. In The Boys, Homelander is a literal walking embodiment of the powers that be. He's a literal byproduct of capitalistic greed. The corporations created Compound V, which was the problem, and then they created Homelander as the solution. As on the nose as everything Homelander represents is, it allows us to view him in this entertaining light because deep down we really know if he's killed by someone someday, the powers that be will still live on.
What we are, really, is a pharmaceutical company, and you are not our most valuable asset.
We get so locked in on him because he's like the Joker or Voldemort. He's simply born from the flaws of a corrupt system. And that's why the Deep feels so gross and despicable to me. It doesn't matter who's in charge of the Seven, the Deep will always be right there, doing whatever he can to get next to power. The weird, interesting thing about the Deep is it never even seems as if he actually wants real power or control. He's just perfectly fine just being next to it. If the people who have real power and control acknowledge that he exists, that's all that matters to him. He's good with that. On top of him being a complete power slut, everyone also overlooks him. They underestimate him so much that I believe he'd be able to slither into the ranks no matter who's in charge. At the end of season 4 of The Boys, he has no moral code or compass, no more redeeming qualities. He's simply just a tool for the powers to be to use however they please. And in my opinion, that's what makes him one of the most dangerous and frustrating characters on the show. But if you want to see what I think about some of the other characters on The Boys, click right here.
It's me, the Deep, aka number 2, in the greatest superhero team ever assembled. While you watch humans compete at swimming, think about this. There are fish that are like way faster than them. A black marlin can swim 80 miles per hour. I should know, because one of my best bros is a marlin named Loco.